and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nyambura and this is 100 on Books. This is another wrap-up. It's been so long, but hey, I'm sharing some books I've been reading. I've been, more importantly, finishing books. So let's get into it. The first book I finished recently is Rez Ball by Byron. I did this as a hybrid read. The audio is read by Nobess. I borrowed this because it was suggested by Kindle, went to the library, it was available, borrowed it. And this book follows an Ojibwe teen called Trebran, as he plays basketball and tries to live up to the legacy of his father, who was a high school basketballer, and his late brother, who also played basketball in the same school, as well as, you know, like, follows him in his everyday life, going to school. He has a crush on a girl who is unrequited, and that makes for an interesting, like, moment in his life. He has these two close friends of his, one of whom is as excited about basketball as he is, and another one who sells himself as a documentary filmmaker who's following him on his journey to hopefully go to the NBA, as they, you know, live their lives, spend time with each other and all of that stuff. Trey is navigating not just being a kid who loves basketball, not just his late brother's legacy, which are like big shoes for him to fill, but also the tension that comes from being an indigenous teen who's going up against white teams that disrespect them because they are from like a low income community, but also because they're indigenous, and the politics and history that is present in every moment of those interactions. And just, yeah, like, this was such an interesting window into the life of kids living on a reservation, hence the Rez of Rez Ball, and also just thinking about a very American teen way of going through life. So Americans, my brother and I were talking about this earlier today, they have a very interesting relationship, like sex, alcohol and stuff like that, like a very prohibition, like, stance towards them, like, and that shows up in the way, for instance, they talk about sex, they talk about alcohol, but also the way they are so restrictive, but also seeking it out almost aggressively, and a bit of it is like, oh, fix your relationship with this stuff, guys. But that's not, I don't think it's not about America only. I think it's a global issue in places where certain religious ideas and certain, like, social mores are the norm and so on. But anyway, all this stuff shows up in this book, so it's such an interesting, like, sociological text, but also it's a really fantastic story, and I was so taken up by it. It helped break my reading slump, honestly and truly, and I love that for me. The next two books I read, I'm going to be talking about together, so I'll just put them up here together, and those are A Woman's Story and A Man's Place, both by Ernaux, and both translated by Tanya. These were both recommended to me by Amelia. I talked about them in my last Maktaba Manenos, but yeah, I'll post the link to the video where she recommended them down below. And I'm talking about them together because A Woman's Place is about Ernaux's mom, and A Man's Place is about Ernaux's dad. And they're tagged as memoirs, but they're almost like short biographies, like vibes-based biographies with, like, sociological elements thrown in and so on. And in both of them, Ernaux sort of, like, talks about her parents' relationships with where they came from. Both of them came from, like, poor, one would say, working class backgrounds, and they really worked hard for their daughter to be able to enter the middle classes, you know, the professional class and so on. And they came from families where they spoke dialect. I don't know why I'd never thought about this in the context of France, but I think about this in the context of Italy, that pre this unified language across the country, people in different parts of the country were speaking different dialects and all of that stuff. And so she talks about how their language, their mannerisms, and so on were such a huge part of the way they moved through the world, and the anxieties about interacting with people who they thought of as being from higher classes, about coming from families where they'd never owned anything, so that they were the first ones in their family to, for instance, own their homes, to own businesses and stuff like that, and how that showed up in the lives they lived. Ernaux's mother lived longer than her father, which meant she got to see Ernaux's children grow up. And so there is like an overlap, of course, in their stories up to the point where her father passes away, and both of these books, it's not a spoiler, open up at her parents passing away, and then she sort of goes back to her childhood, to their childhoods, and so on. And I found them really interesting because I read Ernaux's work before, but this is the first time where I've really sort of thought about where she came from, you know, like coming from a working class background, you know, parents who were shopkeepers who owned a cafe and so on. They were not rich by any stretch of the imagination. They didn't have much of an education. They really had to sort of like how do I say it, like put themselves in a certain mode of being in order to speak quote unquote proper French, in order to have like good manners, whatever that is. And in talking about her parents and their relationship to class and to money and to professions or like occupation and so on, she is also talking about her own relationship to class and how by moving through like the world of schooling and so on, like she talks about how at 17 she was already such an odd girl in her neighborhood. This is Ernaux, because she was still in education while her peers had gone to work. This is 17, you know, I'm not talking about her being 27 and still being in education. It's like, okay, master's, PhD, or whatever. No, I'm talking she's still in high school, but her peers, once they reach the age when you can leave education, have left to go and work. And that sort of causes a break between her and her age mates in the village, so that the people who she has a bigger connection with, her middle class classmates at the convent school her parents have sent her to, and so on. But this is such an interesting view of, as I said, class of France during a certain time. For instance, I highlighted the fact that her father, because he was considered a tradesman, did not have national insurance and so had to pay for some of his health costs out of pocket. But towards the end, tradesmen have been added into the national health scheme, so he's able to access healthcare like that. And so, for instance, when Americans talk about Europe TM, I say Americans because they're the ones who talk about Europe a lot on the internet. I mean, like on YouTube and places are going to be like, in Europe, they say in Europe that, in France this, or in the UK this, or blah blah. Okay, sorry to the people in the UK. I know you chose Brexit, so you probably don't consider yourself Europeans, but they have this notion of Europe as the place where you get like free healthcare or highly subsidized healthcare and so on. And so to see that there were these class distinctions in the way people were being added to the healthcare system and so on, really paints a very different picture of France. And for me, like, I also was thinking about the fact that as these people were so poor, they're basically living feudal lives in France, which is why, for instance, they did not own the land they were working. They had jobs that barely paid them anything. They were withdrawn from school really young to go and work in factories, to go and work as maids and so on. France was colonizing so many countries. Like, why are you thieving things if you can't give your people things? Like, first of all, stop thieving things, obviously. But also, I hate capitalism. I'm sorry, but like, what was the reason, you know? I mean, a bit of me was like, so people are barely getting educated. They don't have healthcare. They, until the generation before, like Ernaux's parents had parents who could not read or write. you know, of France, culture, blah, blah, blah. Like, please be serious. And so I love how she strips back those layers of what story France has told about itself and tells about itself to the world, and basically is like, this is what this country is, you know. I don't know if she started out to do that, because as I said, it's mostly about class, but for me, it tells me a very, like, interesting story about France. And as I said, its narrative of itself and so on. And then I don't think this comes up in her book about her mom, but in the book about her dad, she talks about how her husband generally didn't go to visit her parents because like he was from a middle class background where they'd make like little educated jokes and so on, and he wouldn't fit in. And that kind of broke my heart, mostly because I don't know, like, your parents are your parents, your in-laws are your in-laws. Like, unless they are bigoted or something, surely there's a way to bridge those gaps you might have. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe like marriage in the West is a different proposition. But I wondered what relationship Ernaux had. She talks on and off about basically like realizing that she had left behind her parents' class and entered a new realm and so on and so forth. But I wonder, maybe there's another book I should read where she interrogates her own relationship with the class she grew up in and the class she entered after, you know, going into education and teaching and becoming like a member of the upper classes or at least the middle classes and so on. Cause yeah, sometimes those things did not sit well with me, and maybe it's because in the part of the world I live in, most people are like, most people who say have a university education are in the same generation, are in a similar generation to Ernaux's generation. Like, they're the first ones who have gone all the way to university, like graduated and so on. Some of them have parents who, for instance, did not even go to high school, let alone university. And so their class position, even just in terms of the things they've been exposed to and so on, is very different from their parents. They speak maybe English which their parents might not. They are exposed to certain cultural ideas, certain texts, certain artifacts, and so on. And so that's a very different position from where a country like France is, where Ernaux's generation would be like my parents or my grandparents' generation, depending on how old your parents are, for instance. And yeah, I think that's an interesting text to read, even if you're in the global south, just to interrogate like some of these ideas you have around class, our relationship to class, our relationship to our parents in the context of these interclass tensions or interclass differences and so on. I could talk about these books for ages, but yeah, I highly, highly recommend them, as well as Rez Ball, which I talked about before these two books, because I think all of these books talk about class and difference and sort of like growing beyond your community and what it means to stay in community or not with the people who you grew up with. And I think that makes for very interesting reading. So I'm so grateful that my reading slump is over, because good God, I suffered. Yeah, so please let me know down below what you've read below, what's been interesting. Let me know especially what books you found treat class in interesting ways, or which explore class in a way that stood out for you. Once again, thank you so much, Amelia, for the book recommendations. I really enjoyed reading both of them and thinking with them and so on. And yeah, people send me book recommendations. I read them clearly. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and all the good things. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye!